Content warning. This episode discusses burnout, anxiety, financial stress, and major life transitions. Please listen with care. I want to take you back to a moment that at the time felt quiet, but in hindsight, I can see that it was a real turning point in my life. I was sitting at my desk in what, by all external measures, was a successful chapter in my career. I had the title, compensation, level of responsibility that I had worked toward for years. And yet I remember staring at my screen just completely frozen. Not because I didn't know what needed to be done, but because something in me just simply couldn't move forward in the same way anymore. It wasn't a lack of capacity. It wasn't even a lack of discipline, but it was something even deeper than that. A kind of internal misalignment that I couldn't just logic my way out of. And if I was really being honest with myself, it was beginning to show up everywhere in my life. My kids, my marriage, my daily routines, and of course, in my work. And at the same time, there was another voice, though, that felt just as strong, one that reminded me of your responsibilities, your need for stability, of everything that I had built that could be at risk if I walked away from my role. And then what was I going to do? Start over? So I just stayed. I stayed longer than I should have, doing what probably so many really high capacity women do, just pushing, forming, holding it together while quietly just unraveling on the inside. And eventually I broke. My body and my life just made the decision for me. That was it. What I didn't fully understand then is that I wasn't just burned out from work. I actually had outgrown the version of the life that I was still trying to maintain. So if you're in that space right now where everything looks right, but something feels off, this conversation is for you. Welcome to the Inspired Podcast. I'm Andrea De La Cerda, CEO, founder, business coach, and someone who has navigated the transition from corporate leadership to building businesses that are not only successful, but also deeply, deeply aligned. This podcast exists to help you step out of your inherited paths, roles, expectations, identities, maybe that may have once fit, and into a life and career that you consciously get to choose. Today, we're talking about what it really means to leave corporate and step into entrepreneurship, not from a place of impulse or escape, but from a place of strategy, identity, and long-term vision. Because making this leap isn't just about changing what you do. It's about fundamentally shifting how you see yourself, how you create value, and how you lead your own life. For me, the realization didn't happen all at once. It unfolded in layers. At first, it showed up just as subtle friction, meetings that felt increasingly draining, decisions that no longer resonated, a quiet sense that I was operating below my true capacity, or maybe that there was more that I could accomplish, more out there for me. Can you relate to this? Anybody? And over time, that friction became harder to ignore. I just found myself in environments that really just didn't feel aligned with my values. So sometimes navigating dynamics that felt misaligned and sometimes even unsafe, and then being asked to carry more responsibility without the support or the recognition that should have accompanied it and the resources. So eventually it moved beyond mental and emotional discomfort, and it actually started living in my body. Anxiety became more present. Exhaustion lingered even when I rested. There was a heaviness that would settle in all the time, at night especially, and before the workday even began. So what I've come to understand, both through my own experience and through the women I now work with, is that burnout is not always about doing too much. Often it's about doing work in a context that just no longer fits who you've become. There's research now that supports this. Burnout is strongly correlated with lack of autonomy, lack of alignment, lack of meaning. Because when those elements are missing, even high performers who are deeply capable begin to feel depleted. So if you're feeling disconnected from your work, resentful instead of energized, or as if you're constantly performing for someone else rather than truly leading, it's worth asking whether what you need is really a rest or maybe what you need is redirection. This is where I want to offer some grounding, because so often entrepreneurship is often romanticized as the solution to corporate burnout, especially for women. The narrative tends to sound like, if I could just leave this job, everything would be better. But entrepreneurship doesn't automatically resolve misalignment. As a matter of fact, in many ways, it magnifies it. It asks you to lead yourself in a way that corporate structure structures often shield you from. It reveals where you're unclear with yourself, where you lack discipline, and maybe where you've been relying on external validation or direction to find your path. It requires a level of ownership and, frankly, self-love that can feel both liberating and confronting at the same time. When I made the transition, it wasn't a clean break into clarity and confidence. It was layered with uncertainty. There were moments of doubt, financial pressure, and the need to constantly recalibrate. The real shift wasn't really just leaving corporate. It was stepping into a new identity, one where I was no longer being managed, but fully responsible for creating my own path. And that is the deeper and sometimes very spiritual work of entrepreneurship. One of the most important things I want you to understand is that this transition doesn't need to be abrupt. It doesn't need to be disruptive in order for it to really be real. In fact, some of the strongest transitions that I've seen and experienced are ones that were built gradually, but also very intentionally. Starting while you're still employed allows you to create stability as you begin to build. It also gives you the space to test ideas, validate demand, and begin generating income without immediate pressure of needing your business to fully sustain you. It doesn't require a fully formed brand or even a perfect offer. What it really requires is clarity around the problem that you can solve and a willingness to offer that solution in a really simple and tangible way. For me, that meant looking at the skills I had already developed. So I knew strategy, marketing, and communications and systems. And then I started translating those into services that created immediate value for others. At the same time, I began putting just basic structures in place, tracking income and expenses. It started as just an Excel sheet or a Google Doc, and then setting up separate accounts, documenting all of our processes, not because everything necessarily needed to be complex, but because I learned from my corporate experience that businesses scale on systems, not just talent. So this phase is really less about perfection and more about proof that your work creates value, proof that people are willing to pay for it, proof that you alone can generate momentum. But we can't talk about making this leap without talking about money in a clear and grounded way. You'll hear me in other episodes talk more about money and more about our mindsets around money. For today, one of the first things I just need you need is just really a true understanding of your personal baseline. So what we're talking about in practical terms is what it actually costs for you to live your life each month. Not an ideal version of it, maybe not like the lifestyle that you wish you had, but truly right now, what is the real number? And then from there, you can assess your runway. How many months could you sustain yourself without consistent income and begin to define what it would take for your business to replace your current earnings? But this is where many people underestimate the transition, because revenue is not the same as income. You need to account for taxes, expenses, and variability, especially in early stages of growth. There will be times of great feast and also great famine. So making sure that you're prepared, that's what you're really aiming for, is not perfection, it's preparedness. Having some level of income already coming in, or maybe a clear and tested path for generating it, it just creates a very different experience than stepping into the unknown without any traction at all. When I made my transition, I didn't have an absolute certainty, but I did have just enough evidence and enough internal alignment, not completely, but just enough to move forward. And that combination really matters. So I also want to be honest about something that just doesn't get said enough. That first year of entrepreneurship, I hate to say this, but it's true. It can be really challenging because you're building in real time and sometimes often without a roadmap. You're making decisions without the same safety nets that you've had before working in corporate. Sometimes you're building, we like to say at my companies, you're sometimes building the airplane while you're flying it. If you've heard that before. You're learning, you're adjusting, you're growing, and at a pace that can sometimes feel pretty intense. There were actually moments in my journey where it just would have been easier to go back, return to something more predictable, more defined, a regular paycheck. I mean, every other Friday. That's great. But what grounded me was the clarity that I wasn't simply trying to leave something behind. I was actually building towards something more meaningful. And eventually I grew to understand that I was building toward something that was more about me, a life with greater autonomy, work that felt aligned with who I am, the ability to create value in a way that reflected my vision, the opportunity to grow financially on my own terms. That forward vision is what sustains you when the process often feels uncertain or scary. If you take nothing else from this conversation, I really want it to be this, that quiet voice that maybe is telling you that something isn't quite right. It's not something to ignore, not something to act on impulsively either, though. Just something to engage with intentionally, recognize it, know it's there. What is that about? Because that transition from corporate to entrepreneurship is not just about changing your work. It's about evolving. It's mostly about evolving your identity, becoming someone who trusts herself, someone who creates opportunity for yourself and for others, who builds value and who leads her own life both with clarity and conviction. Your action step this week is simple but powerful. I want you to do this. Just complete this sentence. Don't edit yourself. Don't filter yourself. Complete this sentence. If I were building my next chapter on purpose, it would look like what? Let yourself see it. Imagine, what is your daily routine? What does your typical day look like? Who are you interacting with? Where are you going? And what are you doing? Because clarity doesn't come from waiting. It comes from engaging with what's already there. So if this episode resonated with you at all, if you can relate to anything that I've said here about maybe a budding misalignment that you can't quite understand or put your finger on, I really would love to hear where you're at in your journey. DM me on Instagram. My handle is @AndreaDLC_coach. And tell me, are you still corporate? Are you building something new? Do you have a side hustle? What is happening with you? And if you're ready to build with structure, strategy, and some support, my business audit is designed to help you do exactly that. You can find more information about that in the show notes today. Until next week, you're not stuck, but you're being called forward. The question is, how will you respond? Take care.